All right. Thanks for being here today. Ryan Gray, you wrote a book about addiction. Maybe you consider two books because it's split.
Yeah.
And when did you decide you were going to write a book, and how did you go about beginning to do it?
So I originally after high school I went to college, and that's when I started using drugs, and eventually, my grades were terrible, and I dropped out. Many years later, I went back to school. I went to UNCA, University of North Carolina, Asheville, and I studied literature, creative writing. So creative writing was my major, and for one of my classes, it was a workshop class, which is essentially where everybody writes, a short story or something, and then they take turns reviewing it, critiquing each other's work. I had sort of written a short story about being on the street, nonfiction, and at that point, that was my assignment for the class. And somebody in the class said, "Well, you should really do frame by frame book. Like tell the whole story. Frame. That was the expression they used that stuck in my mind. Frame by frame, each event after the other, and um, that was essentially how I got stuck on. Well, maybe it should be a whole book.
There's a good book about writing. I don't know if you've read those. Like Stephen King's On Writing is pretty good. Talks about the thing
Definitely.
that stuck with me the most about that is like you develop this kind of toolkit as a writer, and it's another tool for your toolkit. And then there's another book. I can't remember the lady that wrote it. I can't remember her name, but it's called Bird by Bird, and it's similar to that idea. That's what Frame by Frame made me think of, where the idea is when she was a kid, she had to do a report on birds, and she waited until the last minute to do it. So Sunday night before it's due on Monday, she starts doing it, and she had to do however many birds in this report. And she felt overwhelmed by it. And she's sitting at the kitchen table and asked her dad how she going to do it. And he said, bird by bird. So nice
Yeah.
way, kind of the same idea of, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So it's a good way to break down any problem, whether it's just a everyday problem, writing a book, finishing a project, anything like that. When you started school, or when you went back the second time for your literature degree, what were you planning on doing with a degree in literature and I guess a focus in creative writing?
To be a writer, to write. They didn't, as creative writing majors, we didn't have very many. Um, I was surprised how little literature we were expected to study. I mean, like there was introduction to literature, and then pretty much um, covered in two classes covered all ancient to Renaissance, Renaissance to modern. So the entire gamut, the entire world of literature was covered in two classes, and I was sort of also sort of made me give props to some of the literature majors that weren't creative writing concentration majors. But anyway, I think it was I wanted to be a better writer. Um, I think I would say I learned a lot by doing
How
that.
do they, what kind of classes are they that when you're going to get the concentration in it, what do they focus on to make you a better writer? Are they breaking it apart in pieces, or is every class kind of like taking it from a whole idea of being a writer approach, or is there like a specialty of how to how to develop characters or things like that?
It was all kind of like I was saying, the what do you call it, the workshop classes. Those were the main thing. I don't remember how many workshop classes we had to do, like maybe like 4 or 5 workshop classes. That was when I think of studying creative writing or being a creative writing major, I think of those workshop classes, and that was what kind of distinguished being a creative writing major, was doing um, getting a little bit of experience under your belt, writing and having, because a big part of writing is being open and comfortable receiving critiques. I mean, I've probably applied to, as far as agents and publishers, hundreds. And most of the time they just say, "Oh, this isn't what we're looking for. This isn't a good fit." But occasionally you have to be comfortable with negative feedback. So
Yeah.
that's an important part of being a creative writing major, is like being open. You write something and you think, "Oh, this is the best thing ever, the best thing since whatever," and you have to be kind of, you know, okay, well, I missed that. This person's right. Good feedback. Because also that's another important part of the writing process, is having your peers review it. Um, kind of kind of gives you a, I don't know how to put this. Kind of gives you like a perspective that you can't really give to yourself, because it's your own work, it's your own writing. Um, but if you have some peer one of your peers review it, it's like a different perspective. It's really, I mean, you don't want to publish a book without having some kind of somebody give you feedback.
When you started college the first time, was it for the same thing, for literature and writing?
No, actually, I was a physics major, which is a big it's a big difference there. One's the fine arts and the other's
Applied. Yeah.
science. But yeah, I think at the time when I was a physics major, I started out with journaling, and journaling was the only form of writing I did, and I didn't even do it that much. But later on, after I dropped out, I started getting more into poetry and writing prose. But I started with the journaling, and I just sort of found my own voice. Um, as the kind of briefly mentioned, the book, or the 2 books that I wrote, are about they're about addiction in part. They're also, I sort of see them not really as, not, I can't really call them novels, but um, you know your traditional classic book. Um, but I'm also hoping that people who are struggling with addiction will read it and carry the message that way.
When you were putting it together, did you have a plan of like an outline for it? Did you do a lot of pre-writing? How'd you organize it?
So for that, I essentially I did what my colleague, what my classmate said, frame by frame, and I sort of spent probably a few weeks writing out what I wanted to say. And then at that point, with that structure there put down there, I was able to sort of frame by frame, one one chapter at a time, go through the whole experience. Because this was in 2007. The book is called Twilight in York. For it being in York, Pennsylvania, everything that happens is on the streets of York, Pennsylvania. And lost my train of thought there.
That's all right. Twilight was also big around that time, wasn't it? The like the vampire thing.
Yeah. Yes. No correlation at all.
Well, it's a night. It's a night, so that's pretty close.
Yeah.
With your, are you still writing poetry?
Not really. My prose is poetic. I've had people call it lyrical, but not so much poetry. I never got like super serious about poetry. I would kind of write poetry sometimes, but I didn't really. It wasn't until I started writing Twilight in York that I really got to, like, I'm trying to think, where I really caught on. I mean, I really, like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is how many hours a day I'm going to do it. And this is my goal. And, like I never took poetry super seriously, but I did do some.
Do you, when you're writing poetry versus a book, do you feel differently? Like, do you think it's, I don't know if it comes from a different place, or is it a different state of mind?
Sort of. I was saying like lyrical. So I guess that quality, I think it's different unless if you're focusing on the eloquence of, you mentioned Stephen King on writing. I haven't read that, but I've heard about it. And you sort of, if you're writing a book, it's like, depending on what you're going for, you can sometimes be having sort of an eloquence about it that, like alliteration, the way that you're writing. It kind of depends. My prose, not all of it is poetic, but some of the prose is poetic, and in that sense, like I was going to read a couple of excerpts from my book at some point during the podcast.
To do here's my thoughts on reading during a podcast. If you get a poet to start reading, it's hard to get them to stop. I say that because I understand it. And this podcast being about creativity, it's more about how do you create the work than the work itself. But that
Right.
said, when you are writing, do you write out like your chapter and then go back and try to insert the lyricism, or do you work on it line by line when you're writing it to put that lyricism in there? Like Moby Dick, I find parts of that, if you're reading it, my issue with Moby Dick is I don't understand all the references and all the words. So I have to read a chapter, which is a page or two usually, and then look up all the words I don't know and look up all the references I don't know. And then I go back after I've done all that, and then I read it again. And oftentimes you get that, you pick up the lyricism in it that you didn't get when you were stumbling over words and going, I wonder what this means. Is this just a dig against the King of England? Or, is this something I need to know about whaling to proceed through this book? And lyricism, there are times in that book where I get to it and I'm like, wow, that's really great. I wonder how that came together for him. Was it like that when he first gave that copy to was it Hawthorne? Yeah. When he first gave it to Hawthorne to read, and then Hawthorne was like, no, you need to do something different with this. Or did it just come out like that when he was originally writing it? So what's your process on getting into that phase where you can take your thought you want to put out there and then put it in that form of the lyricism?
So I don't know if you've heard of the term scaffolding, which is essentially, you've got like, and we live in an age where you don't have, it's not like with a typewriter where it's more deliberated. It's kind of like if you're using like Microsoft Word, you're free to highlight and cross out and add comments and delete them later. And kind of like just going through using the word processing program to, I'll write something and then I'll have like, a comment, keep this in mind with this sentence and kind of go back to it. I think going over to achieve the lyricism, I think that's really almost like painting. Like you get into a flow, and in that flow, you can sometimes like your writing will get so fluid that you sort of accomplish that lyricism. It's hard. It can be hard to produce. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do you think that tapping into that lyricism or that flow is something that is helped by a force outside of you, or is it manifest all within yourself? Like you think about, I want to write this chapter about this topic, and then you think about it a little while, maybe you take some notes on it, and then or it bubbles up enough to where it's like it's got to be written, and then you just start writing it out. Like, is that first draft, does it have the base of that lyricism, or are you rewriting it to get that point across on your
I would I
subsequent
would say
drafts?
I would say rewriting.
Okay.
I don't think you get it on. Well, that it's hard to answer. Like I said, scaffolding. Um, Scaffolding is just kind of like like I was saying with the comments, notes to self. Um, Scaffolding is
Maybe
like, yeah, all of the structure, like, if you have an idea for a topic for a chapter, you might want to write in the within the document, that this is what you want to accomplish in this chapter, or like, oh, I'm not sure about this particular sentence, or should I move this over here or that over there? And scaffolding is like all of that, structuring. It's hard to say like the flow itself. I can say I don't always do this, but sometimes I will use listen to music if I need help getting the words out to really get into quality writing.
Yeah, I like listening to music when I'm thinking about what I'm doing, and then you can kind of get into that state of mind where you're writing and the music is in the background. But I do end up, after writing books, mainly not poetry but books, then I'll have a soundtrack of
Hmm.
that book. It's unofficial, none of the music's licensed, but he's just like, okay, this is, even in my working face of the book, the chapters will be the names of the songs that I'm thinking about until I come up with the name for the chapter. And
Yeah,
then if I'm
yeah,
running or in the shower or swimming or whatever, cutting the grass, then I listen to that song and I think about that scene, and then you just replay it and replay it and replay it enough to where you're like, okay, this is what's happening in this thing. To
Yeah,
it's imbued with that song from now on. I mean, it's like you're watching a movie.
that's very like that's very like I'm gonna have to try that. That sounds
Yeah, if you
um
can get into something where you're doing something that is takes up the you're doing physical work, but you don't have to think about it so much. You can kind of put that in the background too. And then you can think about the writing. For me, running is the best, especially if you're on a treadmill because you're not going anywhere. You don't have to worry about wild animals attacking you or be aware of your surroundings so much that you can just listen to the music and go. And then you might listen to the song more than once, but you can go through that whole scene over and over again. And then when you sit down to write it, oftentimes you're writing it while you're listening to it too. But
mm,
I find that's a good way to kind of stir up that thought and get that connection with those ideas. But I also think that ideas, while they come from our own mind and our own experience, that there are times where you connect with something bigger than
mm,
yourself, some sort of creative force. And
sure.
then that's when you get into that flow and you're like, oh, this is writing itself, whether it's the character that you have two characters talking and you're like, wow, I didn't expect this conversation to go this well. I didn't know it was going to go this direction. And it changes your view of what the story is going to be. That's pretty great. It could also be annoying because you're trying to steer it a direction and it's going a different one. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's that idea of like I'm gonna have to try that, like where you're listening to music and you're associating a particular, it's not like you're saying you're associating a particular song or a
Mhm.
particular artist with a specific chapter, kind of.
You can you can feel it in the action too. At least it is for me. I don't know if another reader picks up the same thing, but oftentimes when I send the draft to somebody to read just to make sure it's making sense, then I'll send them the list of the songs, and or they'll
Uh,
be still written on the chapter title for this is the
yeah,
song that I think if I was going to make a movie would be playing music like this or this music during this scene, and
yeah,
it adds
I
that
like
extra level to it.
yeah, for sure.
When you're thinking about your book and writing it, did you have a lot of different notes where you would either on your phone or a notepad where you're just going throughout the day and you're like, oh, this is a good thing I want to write. I want to write a piece on this. So you have to write it out or you think of a line or whatever. Does that occur to you?
For sure, I take a lot of notes. I'm big on notes actually. Um, Kind of like before I started writing the book itself, I had jotted down what pretty much everything I wanted to say, and then once I had sort of covered everything, because it's a essentially a memoir. I mean, it's like a memoir. So I essentially I wrote it all down first, by hand on a notepad that I would carry everywhere. I carry notepad. I always have a notepad on me. I'm always writing notes. But yeah, but sort of like I don't know if I want to say sketching. Um, but if you have an idea of what you want to talk about and you can condense it into a note or two, and then come back later and try to write out the experience as well as you can remember it.
Yeah, in my experience, I've written down notes where at the time it made perfect sense to me. And then I go back later and go, man, this, I don't understand what I was saying with this. And then I think as you get better at writing and figuring out your style and how you remember things, that you then, when you take notes better because you're like, okay, now I know I need to put this much information in it. And this is going to jog my memory enough to where I can start back with it when I have time. And I think that's goes into that practice of writing. I mean, first of all, if you're a writer, you have to write. So writers write. That's the difference between writers and not writers. When the idea occurs to you, write that down. And that's the
Yeah.
one thing about Stephen King's book that, I mean, you can't argue with his success, but I will argue with the idea that he says writing down things in notebooks is a great way to memorialize bad ideas. I don't agree. I don't agree. Now, it is easy to get overwhelmed by your notes. And how do you deal with that if you have all these notes you're putting in and maybe they're about the same project or something else? How do you organize those to not be overwhelmed by them?
So I use pretty much a Word documents as a way to keep everything straight. All of the writing that I do in the notepads that I have, I put into Word documents, and other than that, I don't think that's really the only way that I have of organizing.
Have you gotten overwhelmed by the amount of notes you've had? Like you've kept it
Oh
all,
yeah,
and then you're like, oh geez, I don't know how this is going to happen.
yeah. I mean, I take notes. I take a lot of notes in general, so I've probably got like more than 20 pages of notes currently. Like, I think for me, like, I don't, I have pretty severe schizophrenia, and I've had substance use in the past. So my memory is not. I don't know if that's why, but I feel like my memory is not always adequate, or I can't always trust my memory. So I end up writing a lot of things down. If I think of something important, I just write it down.
Do you keep it in a separate like tabbed area? Like these are my daily notes of just things I want to do for the day or grocery lists or whatever. And then these are lines that I think would be good for poetry. These are things that I think belong in a book somewhere. These are things I'm thinking about for work.
Well, like right now, I haven't really been using it, but in front of me right now, I have a Word document, and it's like 3 or 4 pages about stuff, things that I normally share on podcasts in case I
Okay.
need it.
Yep.
Most of the time, anything that I think I'm going to need to remember, will essentially put in the same document.
When I get overwhelmed with note taking, because it often happens, I keep a lot of notes on my phone. I just have an iPhone and I put it in the notes feature. And if I can, I'll separate it into a separate folder. Like I have a folder of quotes. If somebody says something that I think is, wow, that's pretty great, then I put the quote, the date, the time, and the person's name. Like when I went to see my parents one time and my dad asked how the flight was, and I was like, yeah, first class, because if you can't get there in first class, you can't get there, as far as I'm concerned. And I said, yeah, I was flying first class. And he said to me, you don't look very first class. I was like, nice. It's a good quote, Dad. That's a shot. So I have that written down in there. And then another one from my mom, which I think might have come from her quoting her mom, which was, a man always looks better in a blue suit. I mean, that's gold, man. That's gold. So I have the date and time of that written down in my notes. And then also when you're watching shows or whatever that have great quotes, like Justified, that series has excellent quotes in there. And I have a whole folder of just Justified quotes because I like to put those into conversations when I can. And if you ever get bored, you just go back through and read your quotes of Raylan Givens and things like that. So great writing. And I think that is, as far as a writer goes, that's helps you practice writing. And also from the other writer standpoint, like the person that wrote Justified, that's a testament to their writing because it's memorable like that. So success for them.
Mhm.
But I do a lot of poetry lately, and I have a lot of thoughts on books that I have in the works, whether it's conversations between characters or just ideas for it. And I end up with 20 or 30 pages of notes in the note feature of the iPhone. So then I email it to myself because I don't want to lose it. And then I just put the time and date, notes, time and date. And then I'll print it out, and I'll actually cut the pieces of paper, just scissors, and cut them into strips, and then put them in different piles. Like, this is the poetry pile, this is the book pile, these are quotes, these are other things. And then that helps me organize it because I can take those strips and just arrange them in order and go, okay, this is a poem, and I'm going to put this line here, move it around a little. And then if you needed to, you could tape it to a piece of paper, or you could just put it in a basket, or, you don't want to have to deal with it again after you've already dealt with it because you're trying not to be overwhelmed by all these notes. So
Right.
then after you print out your notes, you have to erase them off your phone because you don't want to, you get all those mixed up. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Then you're writing 3 poems with the same line, and you're like, why does this sound so familiar? So that's how I found works pretty good for keeping that straight. And then you just have to set a time aside ever so often to go through that and straighten those things out. If you wait years, that's going to stink. But if you wait a week or a month or something, then if you
Yeah.
ever having a time where you didn't know what you were going to write or didn't know what to work on, you got it right there. You can just go through that.
Sure. Yeah. No, that never heard. It's another thing I've never really heard before with that idea of so you've got like kind of like your composite of notes, and some of the notes are I don't know if I'm getting this right, but some of your notes are poetry and some of them are prose, and you're kind of like cutting them up and dividing them, distributing them, like poetry goes in this pile, prose goes in this pile, and then you're rearranging everything that you've written. Is that what you're?
Yeah, you can rearrange it if you need to, but it also gets it out of that big document where they're all mixed together.
Yeah.
And you can say, okay, now I'm just working on poetry, so I'm working on this over here, or I'm working on this story that occurs in space, and I need all my space stuff over here, or I'm
I was
working
saying
on.
like, yeah, I was
Go ahead.
saying about scaffolding. Pretty much anything. If I'm writing something, if I'm writing like right now I'm working on I don't know if it's going to be a short story or a novella or a book, but got about 30 something pages. There's my train of thought again. Uh,
Novella, a short story, or a book.
yeah, sorry, scaffolding. So anything that is related to the work that I'm doing, everything that's related to that 33 pages, that project is going to be in the same. It's going to be in the same document. Um, and again, scaffolding is that's just a word that means. When I think of scaffolding, I think of like, the back when they had the what was it, the like NASA, when they would have the uh, space shuttles go up, and they would have the big red um, structure that would fall away,
Yeah,
break away
the
from it.
tower. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think of it like that. Like if the space shuttle or the rocket is your book or what you're writing, the scaffolding is like that tower next to it that's sort of holding it up there. It breaks away at the end, and
Yeah, like
scaffolding
that.
is just like all this stuff that goes along with what you're writing, all the notes, all the ideas, all of that. everything, and then you know, as you develop it, some of that scaffolding, you'll delete it, get rid of it, let it fall off.
Yeah, I like that. I can go along with that motif. That way you can go from the beginning or the end and work all around where you need to while you're still forming your story. It's good.
Yeah,
With go ahead.
I was just gonna say something I've been reflecting on a lot lately is like, so I'm reading a book. I'm reading a book by Proust, Marcel Proust right now. I was sorry, not Proust. Um, and his book is, I think, 1900s, and like thinking about having like Microsoft Word or whatever, LibreOffice, OpenOffice, Apache, whatever it is that you use. There's so much freedom to, you know, write in that scaffolding, or delete stuff you don't want, highlight things, take things out, move things, as opposed to thinking about hundreds of years ago what they must have done with having a typewriter, where you don't have you don't have all that freedom to do all that, as the writing process must have been just just harder, I guess.
Yeah, I would think so. If you're writing in stone, certainly, or you'd probably write it in sand or in clay. I think that's what the Sumerians used, was clay tablets to write the cuneiform. I think that's pronounced differently, but
Yeah,
we'll go with uniform.
You can't delete. You can't like etch a sentence into a stone and then delete it.
Yeah.
It's got to be. I don't know. It's just something. That's just something that I've been thinking about lately. Like, how would I do this? Um, even like, even like, one of my biggest influences is Jack Kerouac, and he, of course, sort of invented the spontaneous prose style. So, he had his kind of writing without thinking, without deliberation, without thinking about it, just jotting it down as a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, those are some good exercises I remember from the creative writing class days, where you'd have everybody in there that you knew, because this was high school, so you knew them pretty well. And then the assignment is, just in class for like 5 minutes, write down how a person would react to whatever situation was given. Like, you're at a picnic and somebody forgot to bring hot dogs. There's your situation. How would this person that respond to that? Stream of consciousness wise, you have 5 minutes to write. Keep writing. Don't stop until I tell you to stop. And then you just start writing. It is that practice of it, but you can really see how character defines itself, because you're taking somebody you already know, so it's easier. You're not developing it, and then you're just taking that step further to see what's going on inside their minds. It's kind of like Dune, where there's so much in the movies of what the people are thinking that it almost gets in the way, because you're like, okay, enough of the thoughts and the narration. Let's get it to a way where I can understand it. So it makes me think that I don't want to be able to read people's minds, because it's going to be even more loud than it is right now in the world if you could do that. So it may be a blessing that we don't have the hive mind. But that's a good creative writing exercise that you can do. And then you can go, oh, okay, I know how to write. It gives me something to write. And I know how to tell a character between a different character, because it's somebody you already know. Mm-hmm. Stream of consciousness.
Sure.
So when was the first time you read Kerouac?
That was in college after high school. I graduated from high school in 2003. So I was reading it for the first time in 2003 or 2004. And I've probably read On the Road at least 5 or 6 times. I've read Dharma Bums three or 4 times. But the first time I read Kerouac was in college after high school. But his spontaneous prose is something that I try to emulate. He's, I guess, I think Proust was one of his bigger influences. And it wasn't until I read Proust that I kind of went, okay, well, this is where Kerouac got his. He likes to have, one sentence that, one in one page there's one paragraph and one sentence. Nope, he doesn't like periods. He likes stick to commas, semicolons, em dashes, but no periods. And it wasn't really until I started to read Proust that I was like, excuse me, this is where he got that style from. Also, Faulkner does the same thing with just run-on sentences that just sort of continue and don't end, don't have periods. So his spontaneous prose is something that I've tried to really focus on.
Okay. Yeah, Faulkner is interesting too because he wrote about so many people that he knew. Like he didn't do a lot of character. I mean, he did character development, but it was based on a lot of real life people, so
Right.
they had problems with that. But it was nice going from story to story because when you heard the last name of the people, you knew it was the same last name of the people from this other story. So, you read As I Lay Dying and you read Barn Burning or all these other ones and you go, oh, okay, well, this is this family. So I know what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, I changed the names of mine. This comes up. This is relevant as far as the genre because really depends who you ask, but there's a consensus that you can't have something that's nonfiction and fiction. It has to be one or the other. It's kind of like when you go to the bookstore and there's the sections and there's like a fiction section and a nonfiction section, and you have to decide which genre it is. But the names of the characters in Twilight, my name is the same, but I've changed the names of everybody else because, especially due to the sensitive content, I'm protecting their anonymity.
So I guess that's where you get into the Hunter S. Thompson influences of the mixing fiction and nonfiction. Some would, I think, say that when you get fiction and nonfiction, you start to get into you can't trust the writer. So you don't know what you're writing. I think that's the biggest point for me of reading fiction and nonfiction is that if I was looking at a historical fiction, I want to be able to read it and think to myself, did this really happen? Like this person did a lot of investigation to make it sound real. Like if you're watching Outlander, for whatever reason, you found yourself watching Outlander and you're like, oh, did this really happen in Ireland and England and the early US? Then you can find those touchstones in real life and see there is some truth to it. So for me, when you get into the Hunter S. Thompson stuff, that's more like drug induced blending of real life and hallucination. What's your view on that?
Yeah, Thompson is another comparison. I've been compared to Burroughs, William S. Burroughs, who wrote Naked Lunch and Junkie. He also wrote Queer. Um, just because of his portrayal of the junkie lifestyle, it's unscripted, and it's just sort of this candid, honest portrayal of that lifestyle, which is kind of what I've tried to do in Twilight. Another influence was Orwell. I have a lot of influences that are older, but Orwell, because I don't know if you've ever read Down and Out in Paris and London.
Mm-hmm.
And that was essentially about Orwell when he lived in Paris and London, and unemployment rates were so high that you would spend days looking for a simple a job like keeping the underground kitchen at a restaurant, keeping the underground clean and carrying pots and pans and doing like really mechanical work. And you would, somebody would find a job and be like, this is the greatest thing ever. I found a job. Can you believe it? I actually found a job. The unemployment was just so rampant at the time, that he spent a lot of time on the street. There were a lot of shelters which were not sanitary, and people crammed into very small rooms. So been compared to Orwell for just a portrayal of poverty and homelessness, unemployment.
How much do you think any connection with schizophrenia affects your writing?
I don't know that it affects. I don't know that it affects my writing. I think it affects what I'm writing about, because in Twilight in York, it's about those last few months leading up to getting clean. So there's a lot of sort of illicit drug use, and the reader can see that my downward spiral, where I have substance use and also the schizophrenia sort of interacting. And I think the schizophrenia caused that downward spiral. I deteriorated rapidly, very, very, very rapidly. I went to the point of being homeless in a short amount of time. So I don't know that it affects the writing style. Maybe it's a bit harder to keep a habit. I like to tell people that want to know about how to write, is you want to have a habit of writing. You build up the habit of writing where you're writing every day or every other day. So for however many hours. So I guess schizophrenia can sort of get in the way of sustaining that habit, and just makes things more difficult in general, really.
What do you think schizophrenia is? Like, I'm not asking about a definition of it or a clinical thing. What do you think it is?
So I think it's a combination of symptoms. For me, I have auditory hallucinations. I'll think people are talking about me. Like I'll hear people talking behind a wall and can't really make out what they're saying, but the auditory hallucinations kind of take sounds and turn them into distorts the sounds and turns them into something more recognizable, like thinking I can hear what people are saying through a wall, conversations, that sort of paranoia, delusions of grandeur, basic delusions. Like in the book I'm writing now, there's a character in the book that believes that the government is communicating with them through the newspaper and through the TV, and they think that they're decoding messages from the government, and that there's like I think I called it a secret psychological war with aliens, and he thinks that he's decoding messages in the newspaper sent for him by the government to help them decipher this alien data, I guess. So it's a combination, and and there's also mania. Anybody with schizophrenia, I don't want to say anybody, but if it's severe schizophrenia, they're going to probably need some kind of antipsychotic medication. So a big part of it is taking that medication.
Do you think that, have you ever thought of schizophrenia as maybe being the thin layers between realities, to where you're just tapped into different realities going on at the same time? So, like, I've talked to people with schizophrenia before, and they're having 5 different conversations at once. And I can keep up with them as long as it's not much more than 5. But it's like you're talking to the same person standing in front of you, but they are talking to other people that you can't see. And they're obviously, those other people can't see each other either. So I can't talk to people when they're in that state, because I'm using all my brain power to keep up with every conversation they're having at once. But it's not nonsensical to me. Certainly, I've heard people talking nonsense or stuff that I can't understand. But I mean, have you thought more about it, like how to explain it or what it actually is, or alternate explanations?
Yes. Have you ever read or watched the movie The Beautiful Mind?
Oh, with Russell Crowe?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, back in the day, mathematician drawing on the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I always thought that they did a phenomenal job in that book. I mean, the movie came out before I was schizophrenic, but like you're talking about talking to more than one person at once. I don't know that I talked to more than one person at once. I think I have, for whatever reason, I have a sort of an unlimited number of identities. Sometimes identities come back, but for the most part, they're pretty much nameless. They don't really have identities. I sort of just hear voices, and that's all it is. But there was in the movie, that had the different the people that he sees that he finds out aren't real, and he has to ignore them. There's like the colleague that's English and drinks a lot and whatnot. There's the little girl, and also there's the guy that's from the government. I forget the name of that actor's name, but I think those are the the three main identities that he sort of harbors, and they always come back. So I don't know that I'll have like more than one conversation going at a time, but there's definitely like some simultaneous kind of those identities coming back, having multiple people like that.
Have you taken a philosophy class before?
Yeah, technically I took when I was after high school, when I went to college, I think I took an intro to philosophy and a logic class.
I wonder if schizophrenia is an artifact of past lives where, like, you've got an audio tape and you record different songs over it over again and again and again. And maybe you've got 100 different recordings over each other, that every now and then you're going to hear something that was left over from a recording before. And I wonder if this experience, simulation, reality, whatever you want to call it, if this where we're living, if we do it more than once, or if time is an illusion and it's all happening at once, that we're just somehow connecting with some other thing that's happening at the same time. And that's how you have that bleed over. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could also explain it through chemicals and synapses in the brain and all of that. But I don't know. I wonder if there's another explanation for it.
Mm.
What do you think about the simulation theory that we live in a simulation? Have you thought about it?
What one book I tried to read a book. I didn't get all the way through it. There's a book called, I believe it was called Ghost in the Machine. There's also, the movie The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
They had the directors of that movie based a lot of that movie on, I believe it's simulation and simulacrum. Let me look it up. Simulation, no, simulacra and simulation is, let's see here.
Is that a book or another movie?
That's a book, a 1981 philosophical treatise by the philosopher and cultural theorist Jean Baudrillard, in which he seeks to examine the relationships between reality, symbols, and society, in particular, the significations and symbolism of culture and media involved in constructing an understanding of shared existence. Simulacra are copies that depict things that either had no original or that no longer have an original. Simulation is the imitation of the operation of a real-world process or system over time.
So thoughts on simulation theory then?
Yeah. Can you explain again what you were saying about
As far as
simulation theory?
Oh, just as, like, do you think that whether you call it reality or a simulation, that this that we're living in right now, this interface, if you're going to go with computer words, that we see, that we interact with, is there something beyond it that we can't see and understand? Have you thought about that?
Um, I don't know. I'm not sure.
All right. It's cool. You don't have to have thought about it. So when you're living on the streets and such, did you think I've got to get off the streets and write a book about this? Or were you just thinking about the day to day? Did you have a plan for the future? What was going on then?
Not really. It's mostly probably if you're on the street, the two biggest concerns are probably uh, having a place to sleep at night. Because it can be, if it's winter or it's raining, you try to secure, either at a shelter or somebody's basement or somebody's couch. Um, Being on the street, your needs are very day to day, one after the other. It's very simple. Like I've thought of the streets as being simple but difficult. Other than having a place to rest at night, uh, the other biggest concern is um, scoring something, getting high or drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
so
it's
I
a
don't.
place to be in a place to be and something to do.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say that I had any long-term aspirations at that point.
What got you back into college?
Um, I can remember it was a while ago. I started. Uh, wasn't sure how much I could take on, especially being with the mental illness. So originally, I went back to school at a community college where I took one class in one semester. I took one class, and I was able to do that. So the next semester, I took two classes. Was able to do that. The next semester, I took three classes, and I kind of went, okay, this is my equilibrium. This three classes a semester. That's my amount. That's my quota. That's what I'm capable of. And ended up applying to a nearby university, 4-year university, and continued the three classes this semester until I had all my credits and graduated. Um, Especially for people dealing with mental illness, that's something. What worked for me was the sort of baby steps, like just one thing at a time, not trying to be overwhelmed by going from nothing to three classes or nothing to four classes. I sort of went up in increments until I got to what I knew I could handle.
So when you got your book and you finished it and you're going to publish it, how did you go about getting it out there?
Sorry. Um, so I had I guess I started with a nearby. Sorry about that. A nearby local publisher, nonprofit publisher, who I worked with for a few years on the book. That ended up not really working out for personal reasons that I won't get into, but yeah, essentially, I went from that. I applied to a lot of agents and publishers. That was very difficult and did not pan out very well. I ended up finding a hybrid publisher, which is essentially somewhere between a traditional publisher and a self-published. The rules for hybrid publisher are a little bit different. They are not benefiting financially from the sale of books. It's somebody that you essentially pay. You pay them, and they do your cover and your marketing and do all those services for you. So I had a hybrid publisher, which I still have.
Yeah, the first book I wrote in 2012, I went through a place like that. I think they call them vanity presses too. But
Yeah.
basically, you as the writer are the product. I mean, they're not looking to sell your book so much as looking to sell you things so you can write a book. And I did that one, and then I learned about Amazon KDP some years after that. I think that first book got published in 2014, and then a couple other ones I've done on KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon, and I really like that process a lot better because you have a lot more control over what you're doing. And I'm still getting phone calls from places from that first publisher that you get on some sort of list, and they're like, hey, we really want to promote this book. We want to turn it into a movie, and we'd like you to go on this book tour. And then I go, okay, how much do I get paid, and where am I going to stay? Who's doing the travel arrangements? And they're like, oh, no, you pay for all that. You pay for the hotel, you show up to this place, and we'll put you in a booth here. You have to bring all your own stuff. I was like, oh, this doesn't sound like the sweep you off your feet and take care of everything deal, which I don't think I will get. And I say it from the standpoint of a person who hasn't had a publisher like that. But the Amazon, I've done maybe 6 books on there, and I redid that first one on there, and it's pretty great. I like the Amazon model. You can get your own ISBN number, or you can use theirs.
Yeah.
And you can make the changes to your manuscript anytime you need to. Like if you read it, you drop the quotation mark, or you have the wrong word in a place, or just you want to fix something, you can do that pretty easy. And then you can do your own cover art if you want. You can use their formats, or you can get somebody else to do it and put it in there. I like it. It's easy. I think that's a great way to do publishing. Plus you get to set your own price. So it's not like you're going like that first place I got it done. I think it's called iUniverse. I'm not sure if it's still out there, but they say they're part of Penguin, but I'm not sure if they're part of Penguin or not. In other words, a lot of scams out there. But they put the book at $19, and I'm like, dude, nobody's buying this book for $19. I need to get down into the $3 to $5 place, maybe a 99-cent ebook or less if I can do it.
Yeah, I had people that said they were gonna like, what was it? It's like a LA Times annual book festival, right? And they were like, we've selected your book to be in this book festival, and and I'm like, okay, great. And then they were like, just pay us $500, and we'll be, and I looked them up, and it's like, yeah, it's a scam. That there's a really useful website. I think it was called Ali. It's a website that rates, the Alliance of Independent Authors. And they have a rating system where they basically rate every vanity publisher and hybrid publisher to make sure that you don't want to be scammed. I was amazed at some of these scams were so realistic. That, normally you see an ad or you see an email from somebody and you can tell, oh yeah, this is a scam. But with vanity publishers, it's very hard to tell. And there's this website called Alliance of Independent Authors that has a huge database where they actually rate, because like one of the ones I was looking at, I looked it up and it was warning, red flag, they're a scam, don't use them.
Yeah. I like what Amazon has done with it. I like that they started as a book company. So I figure Bezos has to put some fuel in the yacht. So I'll sell my stuff on Amazon. I mean, they get part of it. You get a little bit of the royalty, but it's I like that business model.
Yeah, Amazon is probably the best go-to, the best place to that's where I send my readers.
Yeah, you can still get books if you want to buy like an author's copy. You can get those at a discount, and then you can take them places and sell them if you're into that type of thing, or they're print on demand. And I think I've gotten them on the East and West Coast when I've lived there, and I think they use a printer on the East and West Coast because you can tell the difference between the printings. It has where they were printed in there too, but I like that they're printed in the US as well. So yeah, I'm down with Amazon on that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best way for people to follow your work and to, order your books and things?
So I have a website. It's twilightinyork.com. If you scroll down, there's a link to the Amazon page. If you go on Amazon and just do a search for Twilight in York, it'll come up. Also, I have a Facebook that I use to promote the book, which is just my name, Ryan Gray. I had asked you about reading an excerpt. Was that?
Yeah. What you got? Go for it.
Cool.
Is this like 10,000 words, or are we doing a few hundred?
Oh, no. I was going to read about a page.
Okay.
All right. This is chapter 11. We were supposed to meet at the same tattoo parlor, the one right next to the meeting, our usual meeting spot, and she made me promise I would come. It was the first and only time we planned to do anything beyond spend time in her garage or look at tattoo art, like an unofficial date. I took the bus to where we were meeting an hour late. I saw her through the window waiting for me. I did not get off, and I saw the look on her face as the bus drove past. When it hit her, I was not coming. I saw such pain and terror on her face, a lostness. She knew when she saw the doors closed that when I did not get off, that I was not coming, and she knew what it meant. Of course she did. I really hoped to God she did know, because I had stood her up. I was afraid I had broken her heart. I saw Lenore's face as I hid mine. It was a face of utter dejection, of heartbreak indescribable I knew I had caused. A face of loss, like the faces of denizens after a town had been burned to the ground or swallowed up in a tidal wave, catastrophes carrying away all, even the ash and smoke of memories. Loss, tremendous loss, desperately clutched at in the biting cold. I saw in her face whatever crude, despairing, mortal pain preceded grief. And oh, words may contain little, for in their utter failure at the task, their practice an art proven at tremendous lacking, their work is not even enough to betray a semblance of what I saw. Her face, pale and flushed, was a beautiful but morose medley an ode about an ocean with its bottom carved out by a dull rusted blade. Her eyes were downcast, tethered by the immense implicable weight of sorrow. Woman, oh woman.
All right. Is that from your Twilight in New York?
Yes, it is.
Is that split into 2 books now, or are you releasing a second book sometime, or how's that going?
Trying to find. This is the is it that is volume 1. It was published in last November. Volume 2 has not been published yet, but I do have a publisher for it, traditional publisher this time, and that is going to be coming out, I would say, probably sometime next year. It's going to be a while.
But you'll have information about that on your website.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about. I originally split them into 2 volumes because it was so long. It was more than 600 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So I split them to make them more manageable for the reader. I just felt like it was too long. It was too hard to follow being so long. So I split it up. But I might be recombining. But it won't be till next year, I would say.
Okay. Well, I will put those links in the show notes so people can go to them if they don't remember the name or didn't have a chance to write them down. And best of luck with that book, and then the follow-up book. You're working on something else now, something new, or no?
Yeah, I'm working on I haven't decided if it's going to be a full-length book or a novella or a short story, but it's about 33, 34 pages so far. And it is essentially about, there's a book called, I haven't read it, but there's a book called The Madman Diaries he's a Chinese author. And it's essentially fiction. So it's like a novel, but it's, the main character is mentally ill, schizophrenic. When I originally started writing Twilight in New York, I thought I was going to be writing a book about addiction and mental health kind of together. And it ended up being separate. So it's a little bit of a companion piece.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. As I said, those links will be in the show notes for anybody that wants to look at those. And I will talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.